Hey yos, what's up? How do you make an amazing fantasy novel? I really do think that even though, writing a novel is different than like reading a novel, I think just by reading novels, you kind of like have a good idea of what you like and what you don't like. And I think the way to create something great is to create something that you think is great. And that's the thing, I think that's the key to everything, It's not like it's going to be great for somebody. It's just because I think it's great. I'm going to make it because I think it's great. And a lot of the time, people that think likewise will actually agree with you. Like the people that are not going to agree with you about what's great and what's not great are never going to really, they're not your audience. They're not going to actually enjoy or even read that kind of novel. It's just, even if it's amazing, if it's not their thing, they're just not going to be into it. There's a lot of novels that came out that some people are just not into. There's a lot of great series that came out on Netflix, like The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, Stranger Things, all kinds of like weird things that they have on there. And it's just that some people like it and some people are just, that's not their thing, right? And like same thing with Game of Thrones. Now, Game of Thrones was a novel. And basically, a lot of people liked it. It appealed to a wide audience, but the people that didn't like it just didn't like it. So I'm gonna say that don't write for the people that aren't gonna like it. Write for the people that write what you like. And I think that's the difference between doing something successfully, like any kind of art, whether that's movies or books or comics or games or anything like that. Do what you like and then you'll enjoy it. And also it's something that you'll understand. If you're just trying to do something for the other person, you really don't know them enough and probably never will enough to know exactly what they like. It's still going to come across as what you like, even though it's intended to be what they like. And so what I think about like a great way to tell a story is definitely like to world build. And I think the best way to world build is to maybe play role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. Now, I think D&D is a great tool for creating a fantasy world, fantasy characters, a fantasy adventure, and to really explore that and experience it. If you are just writing about your D&D adventures, I think that would be interesting, because it's basically your imagination playing with other people's imaginations, basically. It's like, your imagination is playing with your friend's imagination when you're doing role-playing games like D&D. I mean, there's other role-playing games like space opera for science fiction, and there's like superheroes like Marvel and DC have role-playing games. There's spy role-playing games like Danger International and stuff like that. But, Dungeons and Dragons is still the king of the role-playing game. That's the one that everybody knows, and that's the one that everyone can play. You got to really teach people to play other games, and they're not familiar with it, but you can run a campaign with D&D, and a lot of people already know how to play it. It's pretty easy. You roll up a character, you say what the character is going to do, and then you roll the dice to see if that actually happens. If he attacks, you roll the dice. If he doesn't, if he doesn't like roll good, then he doesn't attack. He breaks his sword or stumbles and falls. If he rolls a good roll, then he hits a critical hit and he wins the fight, And so it's one way to get your imagination going. Obviously, like the other ways to read other fantasy books. And I would recommend like Piers Anthony, Michael Moorcock, Roger Zelazny, as well as, there's a whole bunch of other ones. Alan Moore, Neil Gaiman, The Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman are more the comic book people, but Moorcock, Zelazny, Piers Anthony, these guys are just like masters at world building. Even if to really like a great book on world building is definitely Dune. Dune is like a world building book. It's a world building story. The movie was just a movie, was an adventure about the main character and his plot line in the story, but that book is a world building book because it just creates all of these different planets in the future, all of these like political systems and like cultural systems and belief systems and like different kinds of people and how they evolved from one thing to the next, and machines are outlawed because they took over at one point and they started destroying humanity and they had to like get rid of every machine and stuff like that. So it's interesting. It's 10,000 years in the future and things like that, you know? And so, yeah, definitely reading, but, you know, I'm pretty sure, like, I don't know if the good writers, the good fantasy writers actually role-play games, like play role-playing games. And I don't like know if a lot of people who play role-playing games are actually writers and they're gonna write about their stories. But I think it's a great way to tell a story because like it's a way that you're not the only person experiencing the story. You're gonna tell the part of it you like, but you're not the only person experiencing the story. There's other people experiencing that story. And that's the thing that I like about role-playing games. It's not just from your own head because like, you know, yeah, I mean, you can have like, yes, you can imagine stuff and you can write about what your imagination says to write about, right? You can imagine a whole world of things like even like Lord of the Rings was an imaginary world and they just created these 3 books, which really, they definitely dragged it on to 3 books. It should have been 1 book, but then they wanted him to write 3 books. So he was kind of forced by like, as far as I know, he was forced by the publishers to say, okay, we want 3 books. And so he told a story in 3 books that should have been told in 1 book, and that was the intention. And that's why it feels, when you read the book, when you watch the movie, it's a movie. So, you know, it begins and ends. It's not like a long drawn out thing, but the books just draw, and it just like goes on and on and on with the story. And it should have been a lot more compact and succinct, in my opinion. But, you know, a book like that, Lord of the Rings, you know, it's just something like that came from someone's imagination, you know, but it's one person's imagination. Have you ever seen like people collaborate on a story? I always wonder, like, how are they collaborating on a story? They kind of like got to get together at a coffee shop or at someone's house and start talking about the story and talking about the plot and talking about the characters and what they want to happen. And you really need to be visual. You need to really like get a real image and a real a vision of what you want to say, you know, a really vision of your own world. And of course, I'm going to say, you want to make it your own world. You don't want to do it because it's been done. If you're influenced by something that's been done and you want to do that, that's great. Like in Lord of the Rings, not Lord of the Rings, in Game of Thrones, they called one of the swords Stormbringer, which came from the Michael Moorcock Elric saga. You know, obviously, he was inspired by Elric, and, you know, he read that. Every writer is inspired by some other writer, and you're going to see elements of other writers in their story. And I think that's fine because, you know, we're going to not only write about and create a story that we're imagining, but it's going to be influenced by, you know, our imaginations are influenced by what we consume and the other stories around us. And role-playing games, you sit down with one person who's leading the game and a bunch of other people who are playing characters in that game. One person is describing the world and the interaction with that world, and the other players are characters. And so it's a great way to really, and these people, like, you really get into their character and they really get into who they are as a fantasy character and they really play it out. And what's nice about that is that you don't have to reimagine anything about that. You can use the characters that are already there. You know, you can use the characters that other people are playing in the role-playing game. You know, so if you're going to write a book, then, you know, dungeon master a D&D adventure or something like that, or whatever kind of story it is. Even if it's like an espionage story, you want, yeah, to have an espionage role-playing game thing happening. Obviously, you have to know like a bunch of people who are into that, you know, but definitely you could do that. You can also be a character in someone else's adventure, and that could be something really, really cool because you could talk about the world that they created. It doesn't have to be your own world. It just has to be a world that hasn't been published yet, you know, because other people are going to be just as interested in this other world that your friend made up just as much as this world that you made up, you know? And, you know, it's a world that it just hasn't been published. Like, it doesn't matter. The only thing people object to is like worlds that have already been published and they're kind of like reusing it in another story because, and what viewers and readers and whatever, you know, people that consume that kind of content don't like about that is that it's a copy, it's not original, it's not authentic, it has been done before. And so, you know, however it's been done before, it's probably better than copying it, you know? Because why would you want to copy it? It almost copying some other world or something that someone else did is almost always a recipe for a disaster. People still do it all the time, but it's like the #1 thing that'll tank any story, because if someone's going to say, I like this story, but I think it's a copy of this, and right away it tanks it. If it just wasn't a copy of something else, people wouldn't say that. They would be like, I like this story. And it's, you know, and honestly, like when you watch a movie, there's just a lot of movies that are copies of other movies. There really are. And I don't mean like the plot, never everything about the movie. I mean, certain scenes seem to be copies of other scenes. Certain characters seem to be copies of other characters, you know? Certain adventures, you feel like you saw that same thing in another movie. You don't want to see a movie that's like every other movie that you've seen before. You want to see something original that you haven't seen. That's interesting. You know, you want to eat the food that you haven't tried yet, rather than the food that they always have at the restaurant. You know what I mean? It's, you want that new shiny thing. Because that's the thing about like imagination and creating something is, if it's not new, I mean, it doesn't have to be new, but it has to be your own. So if it is something that's influenced by someone else, you want to do your own take on it. You don't just want to create that character unless you want to write, you know, in someone else's world with someone else's character, which is fine. Like, you know, if you like Lord of the Rings and you want to write the 4th book of Lord of the Rings, which I don't think you can do that because of copyright issues, but, you know, someone could say, I want to do that and use that whole world and use all the characters and create another adventure. And I think that's totally fine. And I think it's a great idea. And they don't really do that with stories because I guess copyright reasons, right? Because like the author is going to say, you can't write a story about, you can't write Lord of the Rings 4. I own Lord of the Rings. That's my thing. You know, so no one can do that. It's just like, no one can say, oh, I want to write this. Except for certain, like characters that are just old and everyone writes them. You know, Batman, Superman, you know, those things like, you know, it's like no one, like people are going to write a Superman adventure because they like Superman, you know, and then obviously like, it's not going to be the same adventure as, like if they made a new Superman movie, it's not going to be the same as the first Superman movie because it's obviously already been done. You know, you don't want to give someone the same thing over and over again. But what happens with role-playing games is that, you know, you could kind of take what you want from there. You know, your experience, you're creating this adventure. On the one hand, you know it's fun because the people are enjoying themselves. Like everyone in the role-playing game is enjoying themselves, so you know it's fun. And if it's people are having fun creating this world and living in this world and playing in this world, people are going to have fun reading about this world. You know, it's already, you could tell it's a fun world. It's actually good. And other people, by writing a book about it, other people outside of that role-playing game could experience the fun you had in the role-playing game, you know? And things can happen, you know, like things are spontaneous in these role-playing games, right? So even if you have everything like figured out, a lot of times, you know, the person running the game, yeah, they might run it from a module, which is a preset, pre-written adventure, but then you can't really make that into your own story because a module is something that somebody else created. You know, so you can't just like take a module that you picked up at the store, run an adventure. You can get ideas from it, but you can't just like literally do it because that person that wrote the module is going to say, wait a minute, that whole story, that whole book that's my module, that's my adventure. You can't just write a book about it without consulting me. I've got copyright, you know, on this thing, right? And it's just like, you can't make something too close to something else, you know, with copyright. And there's a good reason for it. If you look at music, it's the same way. You want a song that's an original song. You don't want a song that sounds like another song, right? When every song sounds the same, you stop listening to that kind of music. Basically, you know, when the songs sound different, you have the opportunity to do something new, to do something interesting. I think this is the same thing with art, like drawing, painting. I think with painting and drawing and art, it's the people that have done something different are the people that got recognition, are the people, maybe didn't get recognition right away, like Van Gogh didn't get recognition for years, you know, but because Picasso did something different, Van Gogh did something different, you know, like a lot of, you know, like even Michelangelo did some different stuff or whatever. Because they did something different, they get notoriety because like they get noticed because people are looking at that art and go, this is not usual art. We didn't expect this. It's cool, we like it, but we didn't expect it. We don't, you know, this is not what we thought art was. And someone else completely changed what that was. You know, that's why, like, anyone that does that, you know, that's part of writing a story, is to change the game of what a story is, what a fantasy story is. When they started writing urban fantasy stories, they changed a lot about what fantasy was. You know, there used to not really be a lot of urban fantasy. There was a little bit, but mostly fantasy was medieval, ancient, mythological, old fantasy. You know, but then like urban fantasy with modern magicians living in modern worlds and whatever, like Constantine, whatever, you know, that was a new take on fantasy, and people liked it, but it was new and people started getting into it because it was new and it wasn't something that was already done, you know. And the best way to interact and create this world, you could create it in your own head, but a better way to create this world would be to do it with friends, to do it with other people. Because it's like when you're doing a role-playing game, it's a collective thing, you know, it's a collective thing. You get ideas from the other people, you know, about, because the characters are theirs already. So their character is going to act like them. And like, if you're creating all of the characters in your world, all these characters are going to be you, right? They're going to be like, they're going to act like you act. They're going to think like you think because they're your characters and you created them, right? But when you use your friends' characters in a role-playing game, you know, it's not necessarily, it's not just one kind of thing. That's why, like, you know, a lot of books might be a little bit like unilateral, I guess I don't know what the word is, but, you know, all of the characters kind of fit together. Like if you look at Michael Moorcock's the Eternal Champions, all of his characters are similar. Like Elric is like Corum, and Corum is like Hawkmoon, and Hawkmoon is like Ericos, and these guys, they're supposed to be the same character, but different aspects of one character in different worlds of his multiverse. I mean, he really did create a whole multiverse, you know. But the thing about his characters, they're all medieval fantasy characters, and even though their personalities are different, it's him writing it. So they're aspects of his own personality. When you use characters that are somebody else's, like friends of yours in a role-playing game, these characters are different from you. They will react in unexpected ways. They will do things you might like or not like, you know. Whereas like if you create a character, they always do whatever you like. You create them, you control them, but they're all going to have like a similarity to it. When you use your friends' characters who are playing in the role-playing game, you're going to create, like, those characters are going to be different from each other. And I think that's going to make it more convincing as characters. It's going to be like, sort of like that fantasy movie where, you know, the script is written and that's the story and that's the script and that's what the writer wrote, you know, with that script. And now it's just up to the actors to act out the lines and what's written for them. And the characters, the actors, because they're different and got their own identity, their own personality, their own ideas of what's right and wrong and what a fantasy story should be and how it should be told, are going to basically, you know, they're going to relay these words that's written for them their own way. They're going to actually create a difference in the characters that are in the story. You know, but in a book, you don't get that. You don't get people interpreting what's said their own way. And so if you take ideas from your friends' characters in the role-playing campaign, you know, you're going to get a lot more chance, a lot more variety, a lot more variability, you know, and a lot more ideas that you would have never come up with. Because your friends will always come up with ideas that you've just never thought of before, especially when they're interacting with the world that you're creating. You know, so yes, you can play a role-playing game in someone else's world and talk about your adventure, and I think that would make a great story. You know, just like people's adventures in role-playing games. And I'm pretty sure, like, that people have done that before, you know, or at least gotten sort of inspired by their role-playing story, because it's just a great way to interact on a fantasy platform. Where you use your imagination and you interact with other people who are also using their imagination to create a story that you're part of. And you don't wholly control. You don't, you know, you're just a character, so you don't control the other characters, you don't control the world, or you just control the world around you. However, there's dice, so you don't completely control it. You control it but there's also randomness and there's lots of it that you don't control. You know, you can only, like, if someone attacks, you can't control whether they successfully attack or successfully do damage. For that, you have to roll dice, you know? And so I think some of these ideas is something where it's a beginning where people can start, like, thinking about, or anything else for that matter, that'll get people thinking about it. And the reason role-playing games are so good is because it really does, it puts you into this world. And role-playing games take a long time to play. Just rolling up the character takes 3 or 4 hours, you know, and people get together once a week or more than that, or even like maybe even almost every day or every day to play for hours. And role-playing campaigns just last, and they can last for years. And it's a great way to really, like, tell the story that you're enjoying, tell the story that's inspiring you, and tell the story that you like being in to other people. And that way it's sort of like getting other people to read about your campaign, because you can't play D&D with them because they're like just other people, but at least they'll read about your campaign, and they'll kind of also, you know, it also spark their imagination, and it will be completely from your story. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe and turn on notifications so you know when I'm making a video. Share it with other friends if you want to share it. That'd be cool. Check out my other videos, and yeah. So thanks for watching it, and I'll see you guys in another video later.